Welcome everyone to the JUFJ Heschel Awards Experience Session, Racial Equity in the DC Government. We're so happy you've joined us tonight for this 50-minute session. My name is Jamie Epstein. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a DC Leadership Co-Chair and a member of the Racial Equity Core Team. This is night 3 of the 2020 Heschel Vision Experience. 3 nights of learning, action, and celebration. I encourage you to introduce yourself in the chat. There are so many friends here with us tonight. Please tell us your pronouns if you'd like, where you're joining us from, and what brought you here to this session tonight. As Jill mentioned, and in case anyone came in late, in order to have the best viewing experience, I encourage you to click View in the top right corner of your screen and select Speaker View. Please also note again that we're recording the program so that people who cannot be here will be able to listen to it. So if you don't want to be part of the recording, just turn off your camera. If you have any technical issues or questions during the program, please use the chat function to message tech support, Hannah, and there are folks standing by ready to help. We also hope you share your non-tech questions. Please put your questions in the chat and we'll try to answer them there or during the Q&A session that will be towards the end of our session tonight. And now I'm going to hand it over to Rebecca, who will introduce and give an overview of the session.
Thank you, Jamie. I'm Rebecca Barson. I use she, her, hers pronouns, and I am a co-chair of the DC Leadership Council with Jamie and a member of the DC Racial Equity Core Team. In DC, we have 3 core teams that work on specific issues and campaigns. The Racial Equity Core Team works on various issues related to racial equity in the district. Some of the members from the DC Racial Equity Core Team are facilitating tonight's session. If you haven't already, please introduce yourselves in the chat. If you'd like, tell us your pronouns. One of the ways we try to create inclusive spaces at JUFJ is by normalizing the idea that we can't know someone's gender just by looking at them. Being proactive about sharing our pronouns and referring to people with the pronouns that they ask us to use is an important way we can convey our respect for people. Also, tell us where you're coming from geographically and what brought you to this session tonight. Great. So tonight we hope you come away from this session with a better sense of JUFJ's involvement in getting the DC Racial Equity Bill passed. We also want you to learn more about the legislation and its benefits. And we're hoping you also take action and participate in the campaign. The overview of our session tonight, we're going to hear a history of timeline of JUFJ's involvement in advocating for a strong racial equity bill. We have a presentation by Alicia Wilson and Deshaw Hockett of the DC Initiative on Racial Equity in Local Government, which we abbreviate to the DC Initiative because the rest of it is a mouthful. And then we're going to take some action. And our guiding value tonight and for the work of the DC Racial Equity Core Team is one of the core values from the DC JUFJ and the overall JUFJ strategic plan. Ki Shema Elohim El Kol HaNa'ar Ba'asher Husham from Genesis 21:17. We listen to people closest to the problem. As the Torah tells us, the Holy One listens to each of us. We strive to fully listen and trust the people we work with. We work in partnership built on mutual respect with organizations made up of and are accountable to people who are directly living the inequities and injustices of our world. The people who are the experts on their own lives. And now I'm going to turn it over to Emma to talk more about the timeline of this work.
Thanks, Rebecca. Hi, everyone. I'm Emma Rafaelov. I use she, her pronouns, and I am one of the co-chairs of the Racial Equity Core Team at JUFJ. So to take a little bit of a step back in time, during the spring and summer of 2018, DC community members of JUFJ engaged in an extensive and thorough campaign selection process. And if you were at our November 2018 community meeting, you might recognize me from all the fun breakouts that we did during that community meeting to talk about some key ideas that were emerging at that time. Our community was super excited about ideas from the DC initiative, They had some specific ideas on solutions to reducing systemic inequality that negatively affect residents of color, particularly Black residents in DC. The impact of centuries of both intentionally racist and colorblind policies and practices is very clear in the city. From housing to policing to healthcare, the inequities are very stark. And so this reality demands a comprehensive look at our systems. The DC initiative wanted to pass a bill driving the DC government to center racial equity in programs, policies, and practices. So in January 2019, Councilmember Kenyon McDuffie introduced the Racial Equity Achieves Results Act. We were happy to see it include a lot of racial equity requirements for the executive branch, so the mayor's office, but it didn't include any mandates for the legislative branch, like the DC Council. So the DC initiative put together a strong list of recommendations on various edits to the bill, strengthening potential policy tools, and expanding coverage to hold more offices to account. Following a hearing that April, folks overwhelmingly supported the DC initiative's improvements. And throughout the rest of 2019, we, JUFJ, prioritized educational programming and increasing awareness with the DC initiative, including an internal JUFJ session with Deshaw Hockett, who we'll be hearing from shortly, and also a JUFJ community-wide program with Empower DC's Jonathan Hutto. Back when we could have in-person meetings, it got a lot of interest and a huge turnout. And I will let Sarah take us into 2020.
Hi, everybody. I'm Sarah Novick. I'm the DC senior organizer. I use she, her, hers pronouns. Throughout 2020, we have continued our involvement in the DC initiative, working to strengthen the racial equity bill. Earlier this year, right before we all went remote because of COVID, about 15 JUFJ community members and staff had one of our annual meetings with Chairman Mendelson at the JUFJ office. At that meeting, we asked him about whether he would support the bill if it included a requirement that legislation would need to go through a racial equity impact assessment in order to be voted on. And initially, the chairman was really skeptical about the idea of racial equity impact assessments, saying that equity is a complicated issue and it's not always clear what's equitable, that something that seems good could turn out to be bad. He said that he and some other council members already go through a process informally to look at these things. And many of our community, many community members were like practically jumping out of their seats saying, yes to all of those things. And wouldn't it be great if all council members had access to that kind of an analysis in a more formalized and systematic way, like through an equity assessment, to allow them to weigh different considerations as they make their decisions about policy. And he thought about it and said yes, that he could get behind that. And it was a really powerful moment for me as an organizer, seeing our community fight for what we knew was right in a way that an elected official could hear us and digest the information and, actually change their mind right in front of us. As I said, we have meetings like this with council members pretty regularly, about every year now, and we'll be having more in the first few months of 2021. So please look out for those emails with information on how to participate in the next round. Soon after that meeting, the spread of COVID-19 demonstrated even more fully the racial inequities that exist in DC and across the country, as we've seen. Our sense is that along with the uprising led by Black activists and organizers, namely Black Lives Matter DC, that these all contributed to council members deciding to move the bill forward. And over the summer, it moved through committee, and then just last week, the full council had its second vote, and they unanimously passed the Racial Equity Achieved Change, or the REACH Act. And we're going to learn more about what's in the bill from our guest speakers, and I'll turn it over to Evan to introduce them.
Hi, everyone. My name is Evan Traylor. I use he, him, his pronouns. I'm on the DC Leadership Council and serve as one of the co-chairs of the DC Racial Equity Core Team. We are really fortunate tonight to have Alicia Wilson and Deshaw Hockett here with us, who are the dynamic, incredible co-facilitators of the DC Initiative on Racial Equity in Local Government. They're going to share with us even more about the work of the initiative and the REACH Act. And if you have questions along the way, feel free to drop them in the chat box. We will be sure to save some time at the end to get to some of those questions. So with that, I will turn it over to Alicia and Dusha.
Hey, thank you, Evan. And hey, JUFJ, happy Thursday to you. And Rebecca, you're right. The DC Initiative on Racial Equity in Local Government, it is a mouthful, which is one of the reasons why I always say organizations should come up with the acronym first, and then you build the name around the acronym, like a lot of our organizations have done. But friends, in the short period of time that we have, Alicia and I want to do 3 very specific things. So one is we want to formally introduce the DC Initiative to folks who we don't know. 2, we want to talk about what's in the bill. And then 3, we want to talk about where do we go from here, and then take some questions. And the short version of who we are is that we are a collective of some 60+ organizations in the DC area working to advance racial equity with and through local government. And I would say what's unique about us is we've been able to build a table that brings together all the different strands of the social justice community in DC. So service organizations, advocacy groups, community organizing groups, all coming together around this vision of what would a more equitable and inclusive DC look like. And in some ways, I would say just referring to us as a collective doesn't do us justice. And so I just want to share a quick story to really underscore what our work is about. And some of you may be familiar with this. In 1982, a guy named Carl Alexander, who's a researcher at Johns Hopkins, he launched a project where Carl and his colleagues, they tracked some 800 young people from inner city Baltimore, from first grade up until these young people were in their late 20s. And there's a lot that came out of this particular study. But one of the most significant findings was that over the course of that 20+ year period, the majority of these 800 young people, most of them people of color, remain in the same social and economic situation that they were born into. And Carl's bottom line point was that despite everything that had been thrown their way, everything that service organizations, community organizing groups, and government threw their way, the majority of these 800 young people from inner city Baltimore remain in the same social and economic situation that they were born into. We didn't move the needle around issues of equity and race. And so a big part of what the DC Initiative is about moving that needle on issues of race and equity in ways that we never have in this city before. And so with that, I'm gonna pass the mic to my dear sister in justice, Alicia.
Hi, folks. Thanks for the opportunity to formally introduce ourselves and to dive into the REACH Act in particular, because I get pretty geeky about the intricacies of legislation, but this is really exciting. I think as Dusha set up, the DC Initiative really is built on this premise that what we have been doing as a government, as a community, has not worked yet. It works a little around the fringes, and sometimes it moves a little bit here and there, but we have to make a fundamental change in how we do the work of being together as a community. The biggest lever we have to move things is the local government. So if you could move to the next slide. As our colleagues from Sarah and Rebecca and beyond, who all explained the beginnings of the REACH Act, the DC Initiative Coordinating Committee, you saw their logos on the last slide, had been working toward figuring out where we could make the largest impact. We focused on trying to educate lawmakers, trying to educate their staff, trying to move people forward. But we found that we needed something a little more concrete. A resolution is very ceremonial. It really doesn't get us necessarily where all we need to go. And we were excited to think about pushing the concept of using racial equity impact assessments. And we're really excited that Councilmember McDuffie introduced a bill to do that. As was explained earlier, the bill that was introduced didn't go all the way. It didn't give us all that we needed. And so our coalition worked really hard to improve it. We developed a platform, we testified, we worked one-on-one with council members and their staff, and worked as a collective to really make sure that what we were pushing was what we felt would make the biggest difference, and also what was based in the experience of other cities, what they've known, and beyond. So we're excited about the REACH Act. No legislation is perfect. There's a lot more work to do, but we're pretty pleased with how it's come out. To dive into the geeky details, like I like to do, there are two main buckets of work within the REACH Act. One is centered in the mayor's office and the other is centered in the city council. The bulk of the work of government happens in the executive branch. That's where all the administration of the work of government happens in the executive branch. So there's a creation of a Office of Racial Equity within the mayor's office, reporting to the city administrator. And we'll have a chief equity officer and a variety of staff that have now already been funded, which is very exciting. The Office of Racial Equity will coordinate training for all the city staff, develop and coordinate training, including boards and commissions, and explore the feasibility of mandating that type of training for large city contractors as well. The office will develop annual racial equity action plans with metrics to really say, in the Department of Health, in the Department of Transportation, in corrections, or in the police department, what are our metrics around racial equity? What do we need to do to improve, and how can we set actual annual plans to improve things and report on those? One of the areas where we as a coalition felt very strongly and worked really hard, and where we still have work to do, is ensuring that there's significant community input. What we've found is that the way that the city currently runs, their view of ongoing community input is very limited. And testifying at a hearing constitutes community input for the city council. Doing a survey constitutes community input for the executive branch. That's not the type of consultation that would really include the people most affected by structural racism in the solution development process to improve the conditions that perpetuate structural racism. So what's in the bill is that the Office of Racial Equity will hold public engagement forums periodically, and it'll establish a racial equity advisory board that would provide ongoing consultation and guidance to the office. On the council side, there's the development of a council office on racial equity that'll have a director. It will go through a process to determine what tool it uses to evaluate the impact of legislation on racial equity in the city. And this is really, for me, the most radical part of this bill. It's very exciting. When a bill passes, or when a bill is introduced and goes to committee for discussions in the city, there's a fiscal analysis and scoring, and there's a legal analysis. Now there will also be a racial equity impact analysis. And what that will do will tell council members if the legislation they're debating will improve or harm the current state of equity in the city. And so the council will have tools to always vote for legislation that will actually improve the situation instead of either perpetuating existing structures or falsely make people think that they're improving things when it doesn't really. The council's office will also be doing some coordination. We're trying to make sure that the right hand and the left hand know what's happening. And they will also have a council committee that will, I think they call it a commission, that will advise the council on issues of racial equity. So we're excited about it. We are cautiously optimistic about it. And we think really the challenge that lies ahead is in the implementation. The letter of the law is not bad. Now we have to see it actually become real with true commitments to making it live up to the language that's in the bill. So talking about the work ahead, I'll flip it back to Dusha and he can talk a little bit more about what's next for us.
Thank you, Alicia. And we, thank you. And so quickly, the question is, where do we go from here? As Alicia said, one of our primary focuses will be around implementation. We recognize that right now, reach is just words on a piece of paper. And so much of our conversation is around how do we make it real? How do we make it impactful? And so part of what we want to do is we want to shift sort of the culture and the norm in DC from one of community input to community co-design, and to make sure that community folks are involved in helping to co-design particular components of reach. And it's the 4 components that you see listed. So one is we want to have some role in co-designing what that racial equity impact assessment tool is going to be that gets used to evaluate proposed legislation. We want to help co-design what the vehicle is for recruiting community members onto advisory boards, onto commissions, and making sure that these boards and commissions have the resources and the support that they need to be effective in what they're doing. Number 3, we want to help co-design and have some voice and the caliber and the quality of the staffing for both of the offices that are being set up on the council side and also on the executive branch side. And then finally, we want to have some voice in co-designing what the content of the training is and what the vehicle for delivering training is for all of the DC employees who are going to receive racial equity training, many for the first time. And so there's a big push around, again, making reach real. And then the second piece is sort of a new idea that's bubbling up in some circles, and some of you may be familiar with this, is we want to play some role in creating a space for imagining and instigating this idea of an anti-racist DC. And part of the conversation that's happening in a lot of different circles is one around what would it look like if individuals, organizations, and DC government all committed to habitually practice a set of behaviors that advance anti-racism in DC. And not just limiting that to DC government, but again, what would it look like for our organizations and for individuals within organizations to all commit to habitually practice a set of behaviors and have the training and support to do that? And so we really want to create a space for that imagining and instigating conversation to happen. And so with that said, we're going to shut up and want to open it up for some conversation. So passing the mic back to the team.
Thank you both, Dusha and Alicia, for laying out everything. And Dusha, I want to hear more about the vision for an anti-racist DC. I love that. But yes, we want to open it up for questions from everyone that we have here. So what questions do you have about REACH, about the process, the DC initiative? Feel free to unmute and introduce yourself and ask your question. And you can also put them in the chat box.
Hi, I'm Commissioner Douglas. How are you doing today?
Hey,
Can you hear me?
how's it going?
I'm fine. Blessing, highly favored. This is really right on time because you all really and also I'm a DC Democrat State Committee woman as well for Ward 7. We're having that same issue, and I'm glad that this topic came up, and I'm a part of this, and I want to continue being a part of this group. And I want to make sure the community input and also the residents that live in there in the neighborhood is treated fairly. Because as you know, a lot of the residents are being pushed out and displaced, and even seniors. And I'm a senior, I'm 72, and thank God for that, and many more years to come with his blessings. We have a fire station at the 4409 Minnesota Avenue. The residents said for over 2 years, 5 years, that they did not participated and did not want it to be in the community, but it been ignored by the mayor and also by one city council. That is the issue. They're not having the input of the community. And once we send resolution and everything, once we send all that in, that's totally ignored. And that's been the issue from my experience. They're always targeting Ward 7 and Ward 8. And that's a racial issue to me, because they wouldn't do it in Georgetown and they wouldn't do it in because I'm a native Washingtonian, nor would they do it on Capitol Hill where I was born in Ward 6. So the question is, these are the things that needs to be implemented and need to be a part of. I mean, we're always having people saying one thing and doing something different. So I'm just wondering, how can I myself be a part of this commission, and what does it take, and others to be involved? Because a lot of things are being shoved out of the table. We're having this conversation now, but once that door's closed down at city council, whatever decision they make with the developers is out of the question. Our words don't mean anything, and it should not be that way. So how that needs to really be addressed with other issues, because our city is changing, but the community input is not a part of it. I know in federal funds, that's supposed to be a part of it. They only do a little bit to let you know, and the rest they do on their own. And that's also like when for employment, you know, that has a loophole in it, and hiring our residents of Ward 7 and Ward 8, as you know. So that needs to be addressed as well, because we're not being respected, nor are we allowed to do anything once it's done and the case is already closed before we even get started. And our decision has already been made. It's like it's a dumb deal. So I know I have a lot to say, but I like to talk more. Where can I get with a group or a person to talk more? Because I can go on and on, but that's just some of the things that I have run into my 72 years being a native Washingtonian and seeing the city change, and what residents are feeling. They're feeling they're being disrespected. So we want to make sure that we're not being in that situation, that we're homeowners and we don't need to be pushed out of our home because you so desire. And then a lot of historical issues is another point. Phelps is another issue that they're trying to do, and Smegon, which I'm alumni of that. So they're trying to bring in some trailers from Ward 6 into Ward 5 or whatever. And another thing that I do find that has happened, if something happened in Ward 8, they're going Ward 7 or 6 to deal with the resident, the ANC over there, which that needs to be really looked at. Whatever is in that a single member district or in that ward, it should stay in that ward, and those people that's elected to office should be able to have that, and the residents' input should be considered great weight and involvement. But that's not happening. They play ticks for tack, and they go to another ward and get the information and say, well, we got signatures and we approve, but that's not true. I know I have a lot.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to just respond and saying first, just much appreciation for your 72 years on this earth. You mentioned that twice, and you know, just given all the pain, the suffering, the loss that we're experiencing in this country and in this world, I think anybody who's at 72, we need to appreciate that. So just much appreciation. The second thing is you asked the question, how can I get on one of those boards or commissions? And so right now, the authorizing language for REACH is pretty broad. It says you have to be a district resident. It spells out that the mayor is responsible for appointing people to the board on the executive branch side. The council chair appoints people to the commission, but all the other details regarding qualifications and how those appointments happen, that stuff still needs to be spelled out. And so part of what Alicia and I were getting at earlier is that we don't want to wait for the mayor and the council to write those rules and then announce them. We want to have some say in shaping what they are on the front end, so that we can be sure that the kind of people who need to be on those boards and commissions have an opportunity to serve. And so what I would say to you is, stay connected to this work either through JUFJ directly, or next time the DC initiative does a meeting, we would love to have you and other people be a part of those general meetings.
Well, I'll be more than happy to be a part. I have no problem with that. And I understand how the commission works. But just like you say, you're appointed by the mayor, or you can send in an application that you want to be a part of it. But then that's another issue. Once you're on those boards, a lot of people have a tendency to gear to what the mayor says and not what the community say. And so that's another thing. So if you get on that board, that doesn't mean that you actually you're gonna get the right service that you're entitled to. So you have people on there that's flexible. And I think that's one thing you all need to look at, because we've been waiting on the application over a whole year just to get an answer to it. And that should not be from one of the boards, and just to get a feedback for what to go to the appeal process, because we weren't satisfied with the outcome. So those are the things that you really need to look at. You can get on the board, but if somebody pulling the strings while you're on the board, that's a whole different issue. So that needs to be really be addressed.
Yeah. Well, one thing I can tell about you, and we don't well, I don't know you directly, but you do not strike me as a person who will easily have your strings pulled. So.
Oh no, they ain't pulled my. That's true. And I'm straightforward. And I can't be no other way. And I'm fair. And I think that when it comes to not only to me as a senior, but my seniors, and also the youth means a great deal to my heart. And that's the main thing. If we're selected as leaders and we put them in office, that's who they're supposed to represent, is the people that put them in office, not others that are being paid under the table, over the table, or around the table, how you want to describe it. So that's the issue that they always say, the young people say, well, they're not going to do anything for us because they already have their mind made up. So we need to make sure that does not happen. And a lot of seniors feel that way because you don't practice what you preach. And I do practice what I preach. And I do speak, I'm no disrespect to the mayor. She know I do it too, but I just wanted to make sure that they follow the law. And that's what the city council do not do. They don't follow the law, and they don't practice what they preach. And that needs to be brought to the attention of the community and the group, and needs to be looked into.
Thank you.
And I'm so sorry for taking up so much of your time, but I'm glad I'm on it. But I definitely want to continue with this, because when I saw this and told me join it, and I said, well, let me see what's going on. Let me feel, and I noticed the community, family, I call it family, community connection that you all have. And that's what needs to be more implementation, needs to be more family involved. I'm talking about community family engaged in what's happening. But when you can do more when you have more people to support and engage and get these bills passed, because they only think that you're not going to come, but one does pretty good too in standing up to what's right. And I think it's better more when you have more of a group.
Thank you.
Thank you too, young man. I appreciate you. And I really appreciate you all. I'm proud of you all too. I don't know who you are, first time meeting you and whatnot, but I just want to say your mom raised y'all real good too. And I know she say the same thing. Boy, when you get in there, don't you be messing up, do the right thing. So I'm saying to you all, this is what we need. And I'm glad to have you be able to speak to you all.
Thank you. Thank you. We appreciate it. And I want to just make sure that people see in the chat that Alicia put in, if people are interested in joining the DC Initiative mailing list, to just email dcracialequity@gmail.com. Make sure that you can stay updated on everything. And I'm also seeing a question from Becca and Alicia. I saw that you responded, but do you want to expand upon that a little bit more about the DC budget and being subject to racial equity impact assessing?
You talking to me? Oh, somebody else. I'm sorry. Okay.
So the question was about, does the DC budget need to have a racial equity impact assessment? And the answer is yes. There could be a number of different ways that the racial equity impact assessment could be applied to the budget. It could be through the committee reports. It could be to the entire budget. We had urged, and I don't recall that this is in the legislation, but that the mayor's proposed budget should also go through an impact assessment. I don't think that ended up in the final legislation. But if you view the budget as an act of legislation that the legislative body is doing, it should have an assessment for racial equity impact. So I believe it is set up to go through an assessment process.
Great, thank you. Other questions that people have? We have still another 10 minutes or so, so plenty of questions. I see you, Rebecca. There we go.
Deshaun and Alicia, can you talk a little bit about how our legislation compares to the legislation you looked at in other cities? And I don't know if any states have this yet, but other cities in particular, and you know, what you think we did really well, maybe that other cities might want to copy, maybe where we fell short, just a little bit of a sense of how we compare.
Deshaun, you want me to start and then you can jump in?
Mm-hmm.
So we relied heavily on Montgomery County's legislation as it was being developed. And I have to say, we didn't write it, right? The council staff wrote it, and then we tried really hard to influence it, right? But they relied a lot on Montgomery County's model as a strong local model. We also encouraged them to use guidance from GARE, the Government Alliance on Race and Equity, that has models from all over the country. Seattle is one for sure. I don't personally have a good assessment of how we compare and how we measure up. I think there are a lot of examples of, in particular, where the Racial Equity Office is located that vary across cities and jurisdictions. And we had a lot of debates about where's the most impactful place for it to reside. And our position that I think we've achieved is that it had to be a position of significant influence within the mayor's administration. It couldn't be too far down on the totem pole that it's just an office that you relegate, you know, a couple reports to. It really had to have some influence. And so having the chief equity officer report directly to the city administrator, who reports directly to the mayor, seemed like good positioning for us. One final thing I would say in terms of comparison is the discussion about community input was an area where we were looking at models from other places. There are many cities that have an advisory board or a commission or something like that. Deshaun and I recently had the opportunity to speak to folks in Austin, Texas, and their city office of racial equity, and they have equity action teams, or an equity action team that is a really dynamic model that I think we should be pushing hard for in DC, to have ongoing, intense, and independent community input and guidance into the racial equity work. And so I think we have as Dusha said, we don't want to wait for the city to sort of define what their committee is going to look like or their advisory board is going to look like. We want to influence that now. And I think that'll be an area where we're going to want to raise a lot of ruckus so we can make sure that that we get something that will be impactful. Dusha?
Yeah, you know, just to add to what Alicia has shared, I would say the two other things that I would say are significant when compared to other jurisdictions is, and Alicia noted this, having two sort of independent functions dedicated to racial equity. So one on the council side, one on the executive branch side. That is somewhat unique. In most jurisdictions, they have one or the other, either an office on the executive branch side or one on the legislative side, but not necessarily two. And so that's significant, but it's also something that I think we all need to pay attention to and really figure out how do we make sure that both of those components are actually working together in a way that delivers the kind of outcomes that we want to see. Because as we know, having sort of two separate offices can also create challenges that get in the way of the kind of outcomes that we want to see. But having the two functions, I would say, is significant. The other thing I would say is significant would be the number of full-time positions that have been funded under REACH. And on the council side alone, in addition to the Director of Racial Equity, there are 3 other full-time positions that have been created that will be solely dedicated to racial equity. And Alicia, I forget, what is it on the executive branch side? How many positions?
I believe it's 6, including the chief equity officer. There were 10 total positions that were funded, FTEs, if I remember correctly. Yeah.
And so I would say that is somewhat unprecedented when you look at other jurisdictions. There are a number of jurisdictions who as of this moment, they have 1, maybe 2 full-time people dedicated to racial equity. DC has 10. And again, I know we all know enough to know that just having 10 full-time positions don't mean that we're going to see the kind of impact that we want to see. But what it does say is that there are 10 bodies that are solely dedicated to this work, that if we get the right caliber of people, if they have the kind of positional authority to really wield influence within DC government, if these are people who are truly community-centered people, we can make some stuff happen.
That's great. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that insight.
I just want to say quickly, I just want to try to be attached to this commission. And I know what you're saying, but I just want to, I know you said the mayor does a point, and that's true. But these other positions that you are in reference to, how would I be able to submit, what can I do to submit my resume or to apply for these positions? And also share when this come about, this good information to the ANC commissioner when we meet in December the 8th. Because I'd like to make sure that everybody is has transparency what is happening. And that's what the issue seems to be in the communities, that they're not getting all the information that you all have just spoken on. Even from the city council used to send out a calendar and what are the bills that have been passed. I have not seen this, and this is the first time I've heard of it. So that's another issue, is getting out the information and sharing. Those are the 2 issues I've just added to that.
Ms. Douglas, I would say that because the bill just passed, it is not actually fully enacted, because I don't know that the mayor has signed it yet. We anticipate that she will. So the council has already started advertising for the positions within the council office, but the mayor has not made any moves yet for any hiring for the mayor's office. I see Sarah is maybe going to say something.
Just to say that they passed emergency legislation in order for the council to be able to hire immediately. That didn't happen on the mayoral side.
Okay, so if the city council already done that, So how can a person submit their application that wants to be a part of that under the city council?
So these are for the staff positions, not for the commissions or boards, but for the staff positions, the city has a contracting process. So I think you go to the council website and they have positions that are open.
I also want to offer that we're going to be paying really close attention to the progress and them making opportunities to be part of the advisory board available. And I would be more than happy to, when I see that opportunity comes up, to forward that to you and for you to share that with your community, if that would be helpful.
Oh, that'd be great. So can I get your number? I can give you, I'm 7003 A and C, 7003.
I'm going to put my email in the chat, but we also have your email because you signed up for tonight. So I will be in touch when we have that information.
Okay, thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Now, if I want to go, how would I go in the chat to find what you just referenced to in regards to that information?
You're talking about the chat. Why don't I send you an email after this is over, and then you'll have it.
Thank you so much. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we are almost at time, but I saw that Yael also had a question. So maybe this can be our last question, and then we will wrap up our session tonight.
Hi, thanks. First of all, thank you for the presentation. It was very interesting. Disha, I was in the JOFJ office when you came in to do the racial equity impact assessment, like sort of practice round, and I found it to be like very useful to even just start asking the questions. But I'm curious if you or Alicia could speak a little bit to the training aspect, and just what do we know about how effective or not racial equity training is that the staff would be receiving?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. What we know from the authorizing language is that all managers, all rank and file DC employees must receive racial equity training. We know that it could be a mixture of online and in person. In terms of the content of that training and who does the training, those are things that still need to be figured out. But I think I can tell you, as someone who's been in the training space for a while, part of what we pushed for initially and what we've been pushing for is two things. And so one, we've made the case that for training to be effective, it cannot be one-shot deal, one-off training. It has to be ongoing training that is focused on changing habits and behaviors over an extended period of time. And for that to happen, it can't be one-off. And that's been one of our biggest sort of pushes around this work. And so that's part of what we still need to fight for as we press forward. But right now, the authorizing language says everybody gets trained, both managers, rank and file. It provides some parameters for how that training can happen, but in terms of content, who does the training, those are pieces that still need to be decided.
Fantastic. Thank you both. I have really appreciated just the clarity that you're bringing to the REACH Act, but I also think our this vision for an anti-racist DC. And so thank you for laying it all out for us, but also for moving us forward and keeping us moving, because the work continues. So thank you both. I'm going to pass it off to Ahuva now, who will conclude our session.
Hello, my name is Ahuva Sunshine, and I use she, her pronouns. Now it's time to take action. In general, with organizing, winning happens infrequently, and we're thrilled about this REACH Act win. It happened because of the actions taken by hundreds of individuals, advocates, and organizations, and we're grateful to each person who worked on making the REACH Act the law it is today. It is also good organizing to thank our elected officials when they do the right thing. So if you're on Twitter, we encourage you to take a minute to thank the DC Council. The handle is @Council of DC. Again, that's @Council of DC, or thank your own council members for passing the REACH Act. And as we heard from Alicia and Desha, there's still more work to be done, and we hope you'll take action with us when opportunities come up to hold our government accountable to implement the REACH Act. Thank you, Alicia and Desha, for your informative and insightful presentation. If folks are so moved, please thank Alicia and Desha in the chat. You're welcome to share one thing you learned or something you're excited about moving forward. On behalf of everyone at JUFJ, especially everybody who put this session together, thank you all for sharing this time with us. We want your feedback. We'll be sending you a survey by email and ask you to take the 2 minutes to fill it out. We value your support and your presence with us in this time of COVID and political change. As always, your support is welcome. If you have not already made a gift to support the Heschel Vision Experience, please consider investing in JUFJ's programs. If you are so compelled, please go to jufj.org/donate. That's jufj.org/donate. Gifts of every and any size are appreciated. It is thanks to our community support that we can make a difference together. It's been an adventure to bring the Heschel Awards experience to our community of supporters virtually. Your participation has made it all worth it. The JUFJ staff and lay leaders, thank you again for attending. We look forward to seeing you again in a few minutes at the 7:05 for the next session and at Heschel next year, hopefully in person. Good night, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.